There was a moment, one moment on a beach on the island of Crete, when everything that followed could have been avoided. Minos wanted the throne. His brothers disputed his claim, and so he did what a man does when he needs the gods on his side. He prayed. He prayed to Poseidon, lord of the sea, and of everything the sea conceals, and he made a vow. "Send me a sign, and I will return it to you in sacrifice. Send me something from the deep water, and I will prove that I am worthy of what I am asking for." Poseidon answered. A bull rose from the sea, completely white, the kind of white that does not exist in nature, that announces itself as something other than natural. Its horns curved like the new moon. Its flanks were perfect. It walked out of the surf onto the Cretan shore, and the argument about who should rule was settled, because only a king endorsed by the gods could have called such a creature out of the water. Minos took the throne, and then he looked at the bull, this perfect, gleaming, impossible thing, and he made a second calculation. He sent an inferior animal to the altar. He kept the bull for his own herds. That is where this story truly begins. Not in a labyrinth, not in the dark, not with the sound of something large moving through stone corridors. It begins in sunlight on a beach with a man who had prayed for divine favor, received it in full, and then decided that the god would not notice the difference. Minos believed that what the gods were owed and what the gods would actually demand might be two different things. He was wrong. To understand what Poseidon chose to do next, you must first understand the world Minos had built. Crete, in the mythological imagination of ancient Greece, was the axis around which the Aegean turned. Minos was its king, son in the tradition of Zeus himself and the Phoenician princess Europa, which placed him at an intersection of divine and mortal lineage that commanded enormous prestige. His fleet controlled the sea lanes. His island controlled the trade. The city of Knossos, with its sprawling palace complex, was among the most sophisticated settlements in the ancient world. He had been given the throne by divine endorsement, had ruled it well, and had built on Crete a civilization that other peoples measured themselves against. He was also a man who had learned that power could be negotiated even with the gods. His queen was Pasiphae, daughter of Helios the sun god, which gave her divine lineage in her own right, and a nature that the ancient sources describe as formidable. She was not a background figure. She was a woman of divine descent, with knowledge and capabilities of her own, bound to a king whose arrogance was about to make her the instrument of his punishment. She did not choose what was about to happen to her. That must be said plainly and held throughout this story. Poseidon's revenge was designed to destroy Minos's dignity, but it was designed to work through Pasiphae, a woman whose only failure was being married to a king who kept what he should have sacrificed. The curse, as Apollodorus records it in the Bibliotheca, was specific and deliberate. Poseidon made Pasiphae desire the white bull. The precision of it is the point. Not a plague on Crete's crops, not disaster at sea. Something that would strike at the particular shame of a king, something that would be impossible to conceal, that could not be resolved by any political skill Minos possessed, and that would eventually have a face. Pasiphae went to Daedalus. Daedalus was the greatest craftsman in the ancient world, an Athenian who had come to Crete under circumstances that were not entirely voluntary, and who had found in Minos's court both patronage and a kind of captivity. He was the kind of man the ancient Greeks found both indispensable and unsettling, a maker of things that should not exist, whose skill placed him in the uncomfortable region between the human and the divine. Hyginus's Fabiuli and other ancient sources record what he made for Pasiphae, a hollow wooden cow constructed with such craft that it deceived. It is an account the ancient sources tell without flinching, and neither should we. The mythological tradition preserves it, because it is the mechanism by which a god's punishment was made manifest, and without it there is no creature, no labyrinth, no story. Daedalus built what he was asked to build. He was a craftsman. He made what the powerful required of him. The creature was born half man, half bull, a body that could not exist, and yet did, because the gods had made it possible, had in fact required it possible, as the precise consequence of one king's vow broken on one afternoon on a Cretan shore. Several ancient sources give the creature a name: Asterion or Asterius, a name that carries the root of stars, starry, radiant of the sky. It is a name that jars against every image we carry of the Minotaur, the horned silhouette in the dark, the thing in the labyrinth, the monster at the center of the maze. The ancient Greeks who preserved that name were doing something deliberate. They were making a distinction between what the creature looked like to the world that feared it and what it was: a being with a name, placed in the world without its consent, by forces that had nothing to do with any choice it had made. Minos could not kill it. A creature born of divine action, bearing the mark of Poseidon's direct intervention, was not something a king could simply remove. There was also the more human impossibility. It was his wife's child. It was evidence of what had been done to his household. Evidence that would disappear along with itself if killed. But it was still a child, and Minos was still a king who calculated. He also could not acknowledge it. It could not be brought into the palace, could not be given a place among his heirs, could not be explained to the watching world of the Aegean without telling the full story of a god's revenge and a king's broken promise. The solution Minos arrived at was Daedalus again. He commissioned the labyrinth. What the labyrinth was, precisely, is a question the ancient sources leave more open than popular imagination allows. It was an enclosure, a complex of passages and chambers designed not to be escaped. The elaborate image of a vast subterranean palace, level after level descending into the earth, is largely a later elaboration. What the ancient sources establish is its function. It was built to contain the creature, and it was built so that whoever entered could not find their way out. Daedalus, who had built the wooden cow, who had in some sense made the creature's existence possible, now built its prison. He was a man who kept solving problems that his previous solutions had created. The labyrinth stood. The creature lived inside it, in the dark, in the passages, in the silence between footsteps. What Asterion understood of his own existence, The ancient sources do not say. He had no community. He had no context for what he was. He had the labyrinth, which was designed to be inescapable, and whatever knowledge or feeling existed inside a body that was neither fully one thing nor the other. And then came the tribute. Athens had killed Minos's human son, Androgeus, a young man who, in the tradition recorded by Apollodorus and Diodorus Siculus, had come to Athens for the Panathenaic Games, excelled beyond all the local competitors, and been sent by the Athenian king Aegeus to fight the bull of Marathon. A death, the tradition strongly implies, that was not accidental. Minos besieged Athens. He brought the city to its knees, and then he extracted his price, not treasure, not land, but young Athenians, delivered to Crete and sent into the labyrinth. He had lost a human son to the city's violence. Now the city's sons and daughters would descend into the dark to feed a monstrous one. It is one of mythology's most devastating symmetries. The same grief, the same fatherhood, expressed through two entirely different kinds of horror. Plutarch's Life of Theseus gives us the specific number: 7 young men and 7 young women. Plutarch is writing more than 1,000 years after the mythological events he describes, and the exact figures should be understood as his account rather than universal ancient consensus. What the broader tradition agrees on is the shape of it. Young Athenians sent to Crete, sent into the labyrinth, and not returned. Whether the Minotaur killed them immediately, or whether the labyrinth itself, its endless, identical passages, its capacity to exhaust and disorient, was as much the trap as the creature within it, the sources are not fully consistent. What they agree on is that no one came out. Theseus, Prince of Athens, volunteered. The tradition presents his motivation as a combination of heroic duty and filial love. He could not watch his city continue to send its young into the dark. He sailed with the tribute ships, and on Crete he met Ariadne. Ariadne was Minos's daughter. She saw Theseus and she made a choice: to help him, to betray her father's interests, to give Theseus what no one who had entered the labyrinth had possessed: a way out. Apollodorus, in the Bibliotheca, is our most reliable source for the specific detail. A thread, given to Theseus by Ariadne, fastened at the entrance and unspooled through the dark as he descended. A line back to the surface. The thread of Ariadne has become the story's most enduring image. The idea that even in the most carefully designed trap, there might exist a thread of return, if someone on the outside is willing to hold the other end. Theseus went into the labyrinth. Consider what that darkness contained. Not its architecture, not its dimensions, but the life lived inside it. The darkness was not merely an absence of light, it was the total condition of an existence. The passages doubled back on themselves, opened into chambers that led nowhere, closed again. The silence was the silence of deep stone. And Asterion had lived in this since birth. It was the entirety of his world, every corridor, every chamber, every turn that led only to another turn. He had been placed here by a father who could not kill him and could not keep him, in a prison built by the same craftsman who had made his existence possible. He had no name for what he was. He had no word for what had been done to him. He had the dark, and whatever burned in a body that should not have existed, waiting in the only world it had ever known. Theseus found him there. The ancient sources do not give us a triumphant battle, and the darkness allows for none. It was a man with a weapon, following a thread back to a world that wanted him, finding a creature that had no thread, no outside, no one holding the other end of anything. Asterion had been born at the center of a maze built from shame. He had never been given a choice in what he was, or what he was for, or what the darkness was preparing him for. Theseus killed him in the silence of the stone, turned the heart of the labyrinth into a tomb for a child born of a god's anger and a king's pride. Then he followed the thread back to the light. He found Ariadne. He took her aboard ship and sailed from Crete. What followed is recorded across the ancient sources: Apollodorus, Diodorus, Siculus, and others. Theseus had promised his father that if he returned alive, he would change the ship's sails from black to white. He forgot or failed. Aegeus, watching from a cliff above the Athenian harbour, saw the black sails and believed his son was dead. He fell, or threw himself, into the water below. The sea bears his name. The consequences of the labyrinth did not end at its entrance. They kept arriving. What this story encodes, what was worked into it across centuries of telling and retelling, is something the ancient world understood about the particular cruelty of divine punishment. Poseidon did not destroy Minos. He did not sink his fleet or burn his city. He created a consequence that Minos would have to live alongside. Something that could not be killed cleanly, could not be confessed publicly, could not be resolved, only housed. The labyrinth is not a monster's lair. It is a king's answer to an impossible question, which is the same as saying it is a monument to having no good answer. And the creature given the name Asterion, starry, radiant of the sky, was placed inside it and left there. Fed eventually on the young of a subject city, because the same grief that had built the labyrinth had also found a use for it. The horror of the tribute is not only what it cost Athens, it is what it reveals about the system that demanded it. That a king could institutionalize the feeding of his own shame and call it justice. The labyrinth still stands in the imagination of the world 3,000 years after the tradition first gave it shape. Not because of Theseus, not because of the thread, but because of what it was built to hide, and the fact that it could never quite do it. Minos built a labyrinth. He sent in the young. He waited for heroes. But long before the thread and the sword, someone gave the creature a name that meant Starry, as if somewhere in the horror of it all, they remembered that what lived in the dark had once been, at least for a moment, something born. This legend has been told. Subscribe and return to Aeonkeep. More legends await.